So, hello, welcome to Estonia Real Podcast. My name is Matti, and my today's guest is Jimmy Smith. He's a Church Mobilization Specialist in an organization called Converge International Ministries. And so, Jim, thank you for coming, and please tell a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, Matty, good to see you this morning. It was good to meet you. I think it was 2019. I was over in Estonia one summer, and I love coming to Estonia and got to meet you around a campfire.
Yes, it was around campfire.
Yeah, out in the middle of the woods. We hiked a rabba together. Anyway, it was a really good evening, and it's been fun to follow you and hear your story, and so it's cool to be a part of your podcast today. Like Maddie said, my name is Jimmy Smith, and I actually live in Denver, Colorado. It's a beautiful place. It has a lot of snow right now. We've gotten quite a bit lately, and it's actually snowing right now. And I know you guys in Estonia are familiar with snow too.
Yes, we had like lots of snow this year, but right now is pretty much gone and going over to the spring, and some snow is still there, but mostly gone.
Yeah, it's March. I'm ready for spring. I'm sure you guys are too. Anyway, I live out here in Denver. I haven't always lived in Denver. I grew up in a state called Oklahoma, and came to Christ at a very young age. I was maybe 6 years old. I grew up in a home that was a part of a church, and my parents were believers. And so from a very young age, I got to see and experience who Jesus was in my life, and be a part of a children's ministry that taught me about the Bible. And so it was early on when I came to faith in Christ, and I was a part of that church for 18 years, all the way through high school. And in my youth age, I got involved in the youth ministry in my church, and that's really God started to work in my heart and my life. I started to take some leadership roles in my youth group, and inviting other friends to church, and seeing kids that I knew come to know Jesus. And during that time, I really got the idea that maybe God wanted me to do ministry in more of a career capacity, what we might call full-time ministry. So I started thinking about going to a Bible college, and so I did that after high school. Got involved in Baptist Bible College in Springfield, Missouri, and was there for 4 years. Studied missions work and the Bible. And after that time, I came back to my home church in Oklahoma and served on the staff of that church for about 3 years. I did youth ministry. I did some mission trips with our teens, taking them to Mexico and other places. And anyway, kind of started my ministry journey there. After about 3 years, I went out to California and helped plant a church in a town called Temecula. It's in Southern California. Very beautiful place, and just a very fast growing community. And we planted a church there, and I was what they call the administrative pastor. So I kind of took care of the, executive details and helping keep the church on track with those things along with pastoring responsibilities. And when I was in California, we really got involved in sending our church on mission trips. And I worked with other leaders in our district out there to help lead other churches to get involved in missions activities and supporting missionaries around the world. I started taking teams to Fiji, Romania, went to China 4 times, helped get some other teams off the ground to go to Honduras, and sent many teams down to Mexico to do work. And it was really at this point where I'm like, I like to do this. I really like getting people out of the seats and getting them to go travel and engage with what God is doing among the nations, to see him working in these cross-cultural contexts. I love serving and supporting our missionary workers that go and live there, right, on a full-time basis, and helping meet their needs and get what they need into their hands to do the ministry that they're trying to do in country. And I got to do that in China over a 2-year period. I was there 4 times. And that was really where I leaned into this, going, this might be something that I really want to strive towards. After about 4.5 years in California, I came back to Denver and took a role as the executive pastor at a church called Stapleton Church here in Denver. It's now called Arise Church Denver, so we've had a name change. So I've been at this church since 2008. I came on in 2008 as executive pastor, and I was on staff until 2016. And I'm still at that church. I'm just not on staff anymore. I still help do all the mission stuff there and enjoy doing all that. At my time in Denver on staff, started taking teams to Estonia. I've been to Estonia 6 times now, maybe 7. I'd have to go back and count. Several teams to Mexico. We take a team down there every year, and some other places. And so we've really tried to engage our people to help them see what God is doing around the world and to support our missionary partners there. And out of our church, Beth Ann Erickson, who was a teacher here in Denver and part of our church, helping with youth ministry, went on one of our team's trips in 2013. And now Beth Ann Erickson lives in Estonia as a missionary and has now been there 5 years, serving and helping reach Estonian people with the gospel, partnering with the church in Kolgata, and really doing some fantastic ministry work there. I could tell you all about Beth Ann someday. But so that's been one of the really cool things to see happen out of our church. So in short, I love helping get the gospel to people. I love what I get to do in this role now with Converge. When I stepped out of the role in my church, it wasn't because I was upset or anything. I just really felt God was giving me the opportunity to move into a role that was more focused on missions activities. And so I took a role with Converge, which is our denominational group. So in the U.S., we have a Converge consists of about 1,500 churches throughout the United States that partner together to do missions well, to send missionaries. We partner together on planting churches in the U.S. We partner together really well on leadership development, helping train up pastors to take these roles in churches to make sure our churches are strong and healthy here in the U.S. And so I work in that area of sending and serving missionaries with our International Ministries department. Converge, like I said, is about 1,500 churches in the U.S. and we're all over the place here in in the country. Most of our churches are probably in what we'd call the Midwest, Minnesota, Michigan, that part of the country, but we really have churches all over. About a 150-year-old organization. It started out as what's called the Swedish Baptist movement. So our roots are really from people from Sweden that had immigrated to the United States and started a movement of churches to reach Swedish people and other immigrants from that part of the world. And that birthed this movement. My church in Denver is actually the remnants of the oldest Swedish Baptist church in Colorado. It was started in the late 1800s. There were some immigrant ladies that were working in various, service jobs here in Denver, and they wanted to get together as a church and reach some other people of their background. And so they reached out to a Bible college. I think it was in Nebraska or something. And they sent them an interim pastor to help launch a church. And this interim pastor was given a $20 gold piece by a lady in New York to support him for that summer to come out and plant this church in Denver. And they did that. They started a group. The next year, a different pastor came out to help keep it moving. And that was the birth of what was Emmanuel Baptist Church that became Stapleton Church, which is now Arise Church Denver. Was actually started in the late 1800s by some Swedish immigrants that had wanted to reach more people like them. As a matter of fact, they had Swedish language services up through the 1940s and 50s. They were still doing Swedish language services here in the U.S. Anyway, so it's an amazing story. And actually our roots come from, your part of the world, not Estonia, but in Sweden. So it's an interesting part of the story. But now we
one question.
Sure, Maddie.
There were in Nebraska, there were like a lot of Swedish-speaking people, or not, or mostly with English.
Right. Well, what had happened was they had asked a Bible college to send them a pastor, and I don't think he knew Swedish. I don't know. Maybe he did, but eventually that's how they launched the church. I don't know the complete story. It was a long time ago, but that was part of it. But anyway, over the years, Converge changed their.
One question I want to ask as well is that why you end up want to be a leader or want to follow leadership? Because right now we have a tendency not to avoid leadership positions and not to take responsibility. But why
would I want to be a leader, or
Yeah.
why would I want to work with the leadership of Converge?
Why you started to become like a leader or want to pursue leadership position?
Yeah. I don't know. It kind of comes naturally to people that like to lead. I mean, there is some element of that there's some personality. I'm much rather have the tendency to be a leader than a follower. So I think there's some of that. And honestly, though, in a ministry perspective, I really feel it's just a call on my life. I can remember from the early days of being a teenager, really feeling like God was asking me to serve him in a much more, what we call full-time capacity. There's nothing wrong with, people being in the business world or, other, secular endeavors. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I just felt like God was calling me to go into more of a pastoral role where I'd be serving people on a basis all the time like that. And I also had this inkling that missions was going to be part of what I was excited about. I grew up in a church that supported a lot of missionaries. And so I saw a lot of missionaries growing up, and I really enjoyed getting to know them and hear their stories and understand what God was doing among the nations. So I think it's a combination of a personality. I think it's a combination of people feeding into my life as I was growing up. I had really great youth pastors that invested in me to say, Jimmy, you can do this, or Jimmy, I love to see how you're growing. Jimmy, hey, would you do this? Would you be a leader in this area? And people investing in me as a young man that then gave me some experience to go, okay, I like doing this. I could do this more, right? So I really think it's important for those of us who are leaders now to look around us and see who's the leader we should be investing in, that's going to take our place someday. And always looking for new people to invest our experiences in, maybe our wisdom in, and to be that encouragement, put your arm around somebody and say, hey, you'd be really good at this. Hey, I can see you making a difference here, right? To get that kind of encouragement from adults to a young person, I think is really important. And I experienced that in my life. So I think that was really important to my leadership development.
I think I remember that when in my church as well, that and the leadership was not even in my thought, but one of my pastoral community leader to pay attention what I was doing outside the church, in the church, that okay, there's like some potential in me, and so hey, do you want to try this? Do you want to try that? So,
right.
I don't know, maybe, I don't care. And right now it's like
there's some trial and error in all of it too. We're going to try some things and go, that wasn't quite what. For years in ministry, I was an executive pastor, so an administrator kind of in the church. I had a pastoral role. I helped, preach from time to time. I loved to preach and teach, but my main role was really the finances in the church, overseeing the staff, making sure the building wasn't on fire, and making sure everything was paid for. All of those administrative roles within the church. And I had some giftings in that, but it's not my sweet spot. Like, I really wanted to be more in a missions focused endeavor and really serving more alongside people, not just with paperwork and numbers and spreadsheets. It's important. Somebody needs to do it. But like I say, we work at things, and sometimes that's what we do for a while, but it's maybe not the thing that's in our sweet spot. So there is some trial and error to figuring out, the best places you're going to serve and where you're going to have the most energy in that. And it's really a blessing when you can find that sweet spot and serve it. Not everybody gets to do that. And I get to do that. I feel like I get to wake up every morning and really, work in my sweet spot every day. And I'm just blessed to have one of those types of jobs where I don't dread, getting up, getting in the car, commuting for an hour to something I really don't enjoy doing, right? Some people have to do that in this world, and I feel for them.
But when before you joined Converge, was there any okay, maybe I want to go there, want to go this, or was there any options available, or you think or you thought that Converge is the next step for me?
Yeah. So when I came to Denver to work at Stapleton Church, it was a Converged church. So it was part of the Converge network. And I knew of the Converge network of churches, but I'd never, worked in one. But I'd heard good things. And so when I got involved in the church here in Denver, I started to investigate what was going on with the missions with Converge and going on in church planting, getting to know people, getting to know the processes. And I really enjoyed what I was seeing. Like, good leadership attracts good leaders. And I was seeing really good things happening in the leadership in Converge and the things that were being communicated and done, especially in missions. And so I was already having an affinity in that direction. And then I came to Estonia in 2013 to work with Crick and Mindy Poyer, and we brought a team over from our church. And that summer, Crick was having a baby. His wife was having a baby. Asher was being born that year. And so he had an intern that was serving with him that summer. And his name was Shane Veldheisen. And Shane Veldheisen was either a junior or senior in high school here in the US. And he'd come over to serve with Crick that summer. Shane is the son of the director for Converge International Ministries, Ivan Veldheisen. So it was really cool to get to know Shane and to hear about his family. And I knew of Ivan, but I didn't know Ivan yet, right? And so the next summer, Ivan and Susan came out to Denver for a conference. And since I had gotten to know Shane, I'm like, hey, I'd love to meet you guys. And, your son was amazing. And actually, Shane came the next year in 2014 to serve at my church as an intern for the summer. So anyway, I got to know Ivan through Shane. And I'm like, wow, I really like this guy. I could work for him someday. Like, that was kind of my thoughts. Like, and he's serving the mission stuff, which is where I was gravitating to. And I'm like, so I really got to know the leadership and got to understand their vision and how they were communicating. And I'm like, man, this is something I could really get behind. And over the years, as Ivan has been, working through the organizational structures for Converge International Ministries, there's just been some radical changes and really monumental shifts in how we're doing ministry and how we're trying to get the gospel to the nations and the structures that are around that. And I'm just in. I love it. I'm bought in personally. And, I really enjoy the people I get to work with. So there was a combination of being a part of the network through our church and getting to know those leaders and understanding what they were doing that kind of, drew me into that. As a matter of fact, when I first stepped out of my role at the church, I went to work for an organization in Boulder, Colorado called Horizons, which is a group that's focused on Muslim ministry around the world. Really loved what they were doing and enjoyed my time there. But I was kind of back into a little bit more of an administrative role with that position. And I could just tell it wasn't going to be the right long-term fit, even though I still love Horizons and I'm a big fan of what they're doing. I have great friends in the organization. I could tell it wasn't going to be quite the right long-term fit. And about that time is when I started having some conversations with Converge people about the role that I'm actually in now. And I'm like, this is really the move I need to make. So I was with Horizons about 1.5 years before I landed with Converge in late 2017, as far as this role in international ministries. Just a little bit to kind of tie up the bow on Converge itself. That organization that started from those Swedish immigrants was known as the Baptist General Conference for many, many years. And then they changed their name to Converge Worldwide. And then they dropped the worldwide. And so we're just now Converge. But sometimes people still reference Baptist General Conference. But that name is kind of the older name. But ultimately, it came from a group of Swedish Baptists that are now what we call Converge. Inside of that, so like I say, we have a couple different legs that we stand on. One, primarily here in the U.S., is church planting. We really love to see new churches planted. Jimmy, why wouldn't you just grow churches instead of plant new churches? Well, I think both is important, but when you plant new churches, you reach new people. And there are statistics that show that, newly planted churches have a higher rate of conversion, of seeing more people come to Christ. There's statistics that people are more willing to check out a new church as opposed to an established church, especially if people are new to a community. And so we do like to see leaders developed and new churches planted as a result. And we have high and lofty goals to see hundreds and hundreds of churches planted through Converge here in the U.S. The other side of the equation really leans into the international opportunities, what we would call Converge International Ministries. So over the years, we've tried to re-strategize how we're deploying and missionaries, what we would call global workers now, and the strategy of how we're deploying them and the organization of it all. And so the Converge mission statement for international ministries is we are asking God for a gospel movement among every least reached people group in our generation. So we're asking God for a gospel movement among every least reached people group in our generation. So there's a couple things that really define what Converge is doing here. One, we're very God dependent. Like, we understand that this is a task that's bigger than us. It's got to be a movement of prayer. It's got to be a movement of God and what he's doing. He's given us these gifts and skills and talents, right, and strategies, but nothing's going forward unless God is in it. So we are asking God prayerfully daily to create this gospel movement. So what is a gospel movement? So we look at the term gospel movement. You see a lot of this happening in the book of Acts, where there's this rapid expansion of the gospel, lives changed, gospel proclamation. And so we're looking for these areas in the world where we can see not just one or two people come to Christ, but where we can see a movement of the gospel, where we're seeing many people come to Christ, many churches planted, and really an explosion of growth. And all of that really being tied to indigenous leadership, not just those of us Americans coming in and making this happen, but really those of us that come in as global workers and missionaries to be a catalyst among indigenous leaders to see this happen as an indigenous movement. Years ago, growing up, I would hear of missionaries that would say, go to Mexico, and that American missionary would plant a church and be the pastor of that church for the next 30 years. And while I admire the faithfulness of that, I think the better model is for those of us coming from the outside to raise up indigenous leaders, Mexican believers, Estonian believers, to reach their own people. They already know the language. They already know the culture. They have the connections and relationships, right? It's going to be a much deeper and longer lasting impact when it's done through indigenous leadership, national leadership, right? We want to come in and be that help, that catalyst, that training, kind of to push maybe the doors open to see a gospel movement happen, but it's never going to flourish as a gospel movement without indigenous leadership. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying we're asking God to create this gospel movement among every least reached people group. So what is a least reached people group? There's varying definitions on that. We kind of have one that we lean into that looks at areas of the world that are less than 4% evangelical. So when we look at places in the world, it has to do with the access that they would have to the gospel. In America, the number is around 28% of the population would say that they are followers of Jesus in what we would call, an evangelical context. That it's about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and only through faith in Christ, right? About 28% of the U.S. population would say that. So we wouldn't consider the U.S. to be a least reached people group. There's access to churches. There are believers in every state, in every community. Even though there are still people that need to know Jesus in the United States, we wouldn't call it a least reached group. Estonia, for example, hovers around 2 to 3% of the population that would claim to be evangelical believers, followers of Christ in Estonia. So we would look at that and go, that is an area of high importance for us, because we'd love to see a gospel movement happen there among the people in Estonia so that number raises. Once that number gets up around 4 or 5%, missiologically speaking, we see that as an area where now it feels like the indigenous leadership really can own this and see this gospel movement happen in their people group, in their country, or whatever. So in our work in Converge IM, we target least reached peoples. Well, I'll say it like this. You can't take the gospel to the wrong address, right? The gospel needs to be spread everywhere. But as an organization where we're trying to deploy missionaries and focus our work are these areas of the world that we would consider least reached. Areas of the world that are least reached are there because access is difficult. It could be because of geography, like these are just hard places to get to. Maybe it's a cultural dynamic that, and I think that's a lot of what happens in Estonia. It's a cultural dynamic that has kind of pushed religion away, pushed the gospel away. If I understand the statistics in Estonia, it's about 95% of people claim to be atheists, right? Zero amount of spirituality in their life, whether it's Christianity or anything. It's just that God doesn't exist at all. So it could be culture like that, or it could be really from a religious standpoint, areas of the world that are highly Islamic or Hindu, right? And so it pushes Christianity out because it's at a state level. Like, a place like Saudi Arabia, you can't go and just share the gospel, plant the church, because it's not just culturally weird, it's illegal. So there are places in the world where we feel like access is limited for many different reasons. And we want to try to target those areas to, if you'll break the doors open to help see a gospel movement started in these indigenous, by indigenous leaders. So we're asking God for a gospel movement among every least reached people in our generation. And we add that in our generation because we want to see it with urgency. I want to see this happen sooner than later. And the people in our organization want to see this happen sooner or later. It's not just going to happen because Converge is doing something. It's going to happen because the body of Christ is doing something around the world. We want to do our part. And so we're asking God to do this in our lifetime, to see gospel movements happening among every least reached people group. Jimmy, how many least reached people groups are there? Well, if you look at the statistics, there's about, I don't know, the number varies between 6,500 and 7,000 people groups in the world. Or wait, I'm going to mess up my statistics here, but about half of the people groups in the world could still be considered in a least reached category. And so when we say a people group, we're not just talking about, a country, right? A national border. Inside of many of the countries that we work, there are many people groups. There are, I think the number is about 13,000 people groups in the world, and about 6,500 of those would still be considered least reached, I think is the statistic. So you go to a place like Nigeria, and there are many people groups in Nigeria that would have several followers of Christ, but there are also pockets in Nigeria that we would consider least reached. And so, those people groups have maybe different language, maybe they have different cultural aspects that, I don't want to say divide, but define them, as a particular people group. So it's not just about national borders, it really is targeting. In the Bible, there's a Greek word called ethne, and you see it in Revelation 7:9, that all the ethne will be represented in heaven. Every tribe, tongue, nation, people. It's really this every ethne, every ethnic group, every people group. So that's how we look at the world in that sense. And so we've got right now 15 initiatives around the world that are targeting least reached people groups. We have some in North America, South America, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. And there's 15 of those. We would like to see 20 fully staffed and fully funded initiatives over the next 4 or 5 years come to fruition. Right now, we've got 15 that are active. So an initiative for Converge is a large regional ministry project that we would have that would encompass many missionaries, many global workers working in this region that are all engaged in various projects. So think of initiatives as a large region, and then all of the workers that are in that region have a goal, right, to help that region see a gospel movement. But each global worker is going to take a different piece of the work and have what we would call a project. For instance, in Estonia would be part of what we'd call the Nordic Baltic initiative. So Estonia would be encompassed with Latvia, Lithuania, Sweden, Norway, Finland. We would consider all of that part of the Nordic Baltic initiative. And Crick is managing a project, what we would call the South Estonia Church Planting Project.
Jimmy, what I can do is that I can share it because you earlier sent me the file about initiatives.
Yeah.
So right now, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, I think you right now can explain it a little bit clearly, especially for those who watch on the YouTube.
Yeah. So these are our 15 initiatives, and if you can just go back to the map there with the numbers. For instance, number 5 up there, that would be what we'd call the Nordic Baltic Initiative. And inside of that initiative are several missionaries that serve, so global workers that are in that initiative, all with various things that they're doing. Beth Ann has her cooking ministry project. Crick and Mindy Poyer are working on the South Estonia Church Planting Project. Hillary Pooh is highly involved in the Friend to Friend Network. So there's various things that our missionaries are engaged in a project level, but all of them have the goal of seeing gospel movements happen throughout the Nordic Baltic region. So that would be one. if you look at like number 4 in South America there, we call that the Southern Cone Initiative. The Southern Cone Initiative targets southern Brazil, parts of Argentina and Uruguay that are in a geographical region in South America called the Southern Cone. And our target there is large urban centers. That part of the world, many times you think of South America, you think very, jungle ministry, things like that. These are large urban centers that are actually very European in their field, because there are so many immigrants that have come to that part of the world from various parts of Europe. And so many of these large cities are very, very cosmopolitan, if you will. And so there, it's an area where there are very few churches, very few believers. So they're targeting these large urban centers to see a church planting movement started. If you look at number 2, that is in Mexico. By and large, many areas of Mexico do have a strong gospel Christian presence. But number 2, that area there, we call it the Bajío region, which is actually called the Circle of Silence. There's a 5-state region in central Mexico that is highly resistant to the gospel in a sense that's what we would feel is true to the Bible. There's a high Catholic presence there.
And one thing, why are they so resistant for the gospel? Is there like any historical reason or cultural reason? Can you explain it more about it?
Especially in this area in Mexico, it's highly Catholic. And when I'm talking about Catholicism in this area, it's very different than what you see in some other parts of the world. It's very what we'd call syncretic, where there's a lot of syncretism. When the Spanish conquistadors and others came, historically, in the 1700s, they blended the Catholicism that they were bringing with the native religions that were in Mexico at the time. And that helped convert the national population into Spanish and Roman Catholicism by having this syncretism with the folk and native religions that were in Mexico at the time. And so the Catholicism you see in Mexico is very different. There's a lot of idol worship, and these idols have a foot in Catholicism, and they also have a foot in the folk religions that are there. But it's the faith is in these idols. The faith is in these things, and it's not solely in Jesus Christ and him crucified. And so people are led away from a true relationship with Christ because of the idol worship that is there. And so like where Estonia would be 95% atheistic, in the Circle of Silence, it would be 95% of this Catholic version. So they're very, very spiritual, but it's just directed in a way that's not taking them into a relationship with Christ. Does it make sense? So very least reached, but a very different dynamic than what you would find in Estonia, even though 95% would be outside of a, relationship with Christ. So that's one reason why that exists in what we'd call the Bajío region, the Circle of Silence. So we want to see a church planting movement there to help reach people with the gospel. You look at an area like number 6 is in Poland. We call that our West 15.5 initiative. We're trying to target 15 urban centers in these Slavic language countries in Central Europe that will become a hub for church planting. Number 12 is actually in China, in an area called Kunming, where we're working with the Hui people group. It's a Muslim people group, a minority group in southern China. So we're trying to work with the Han Chinese, which is the majority population group in China, to reach into the Hui communities and see a gospel movement among the Hui people group.
Can we talk about China a little bit? That how is Chinese relationship with Christianity? Like they like a convert or like very distrustful, or what is the situation?
Of which people?
China.
China.
Chinese.
Yeah. China's very interesting. It's a very difficult place because of the communism that exists there. Obviously, there is there are a large amount of believers in China. It's really fascinating. A lot of it is underground, somewhat hidden from the eyes of the authorities. I served in China, like I say, through teams for over a 2-year period. I was there 4 times. I always found it very interesting. I would go to many, many different parts of China, and it was always very different in each locality of how they express their faith. and the level of fear that they had. There were some places where the global workers were very, very fearful of saying too much or letting too many people know while they were there. We'd go to other areas of China where they felt a lot of freedom to be more open about their faith. So it's a different dynamic in different parts of the country. But I think there is an openness among Chinese people. It's still a very hard area, but there are many, many believers in China. What's interesting about China too is there are many, many indigenous groups that they would call minority groups. I actually have a book on my shelf here somewhere, but it's a listing of all the minority groups that are in China. So the Han Chinese would be the majority group, and then there's various sects throughout the country, and many of those are in southern China. In Yunnan province is the highest concentration of minority people groups. So we talk about a large area like China, there are hundreds of people groups that have different, levels of growth in the church or growth in, access to the gospel and, belief in Christ. And so the Han is the area where we've got this project specifically in southern China, trying to reach them. So again, 15 projects around the world. I could, talk more about all of them, but, the idea is that we're not just sending people, randomly. We're focused in our efforts. There's not just one person that's working in each of these areas. It's a team mindset. It's get people in, community, if you will, our global workers working in community, working together to see these things happen. So we get people out of our silos, and we're really trying to be coordinated in our efforts. And as we're deploying new missionaries and we're looking to send new, global workers, by and large, these are the places where they will go. We are trying to open up some new works, but inside of that, we're really trying to focus our sending to work within these initiatives that we have as an organization. For instance, if someone wanted to go to Taiwan as a missionary, we might not be the right organization to send them because we're not in Taiwan, and we don't have a foothold there or a vision to reach Taiwan like we have with these other initiatives. So we might say, that's amazing, but you should probably go work with this organization because they have a group there. They are doing great work in Taiwan. You might want to partner with them. Does that make sense? So we really are trying to focus our efforts and send global workers to these specific areas. And right now there's about 177 global workers that we have deployed around the world that work within these various initiatives.
Can we talk a little bit, we talk about America and Europe, but what about with this Indonesian and 13, 14, and 15 initiatives?
Yeah, so 14 would be down in Indonesia. We call that the Spice Islands Initiative. What's interesting about Indonesia, it's highly Muslim, right? There's a very large Muslim population. And actually, it's the most Muslim, there are more Muslims that live in Indonesia than any other part of the world. There are about 80 million Muslims in Indonesia. Saudi Arabia, which is like the heart of Islam, only about, I believe the number's around 13 million Muslims in Saudi Arabia. So 80 million in Indonesia. So it's a very least reached area. You've got various people groups, it's a very, dispersed nations because you have all these islands, right? It's, very disconnected in that sense. So a large amount of people groups, and many that, need to hear the gospel, very remote, difficult places to get to. So you've got kind of the double whammy here. You've got very remote and difficult places to get to, and you've got this high concentration of Islam, which makes it really difficult to share the gospel and for people to see Christ in the midst of what they, currently believe. It's a new initiative. It really is at its early stages. I believe our first global worker couple just recently deployed to start working in Indonesia. We will begin there by working with some partner organizations that are already engaged. So we're not starting necessarily something from scratch. We are coming alongside in partnership with some of the things that are already happening in Indonesia. 13 would be Thailand. We've had workers in Thailand for many, many years. We've got some efforts there with an English-speaking school in Bangkok. We've got some really great sports ministry opportunities happening in Indonesia. There's a game called pickleball. I don't know if it's where it's native to, but they play it a lot in Thailand. And so we've got like pickleball leagues, right? Well, Jimmy, how can a pickleball league be something that helps share the gospel? Listen, if you've ever played on a sports team, that's where you build relationships. That's where you get to know people. You see them all week long, right? They're your friends. And through relationships, I believe is where the gospel is most easily shared and most easily heard. Um, if I don't have a relationship with somebody, why would they care about what I have to say? And so in all of these regions, through our projects, it's really about developing relationships and being in people's lives in a way that shows that we care, that we are normal people, right? That and we demonstrate Christ's love through these relationships. And then it gives us the opportunity to share about our faith. So even through pickleball, right, we can have opportunities to share Jesus. In Estonia, Beth Ann has her cooking ministry, right? This cooking ministry is designed to get people in relationship together around food. And from those relationships that develop, there's a trust that's built, which then leads to the opportunity to share more about our faith. So in 15 is Japan. Japan is a hard place. There's only about 0.5% of the Japanese population that would say that they are followers of Christ. So it's a very hard area, but it's interesting. We've had missionaries, and I say we, there have been missionaries in Japan for 400 years. But it is a very difficult place to spread the gospel. So we are working hard to work with the churches that are there to develop an indigenous gospel movement. But very difficult place.
Can you explain it a little bit more about, why it's so difficult? And it's like because of the understanding of the religion or God is like very different from how we as Europeans see it.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the area in Japan. What I know is it's probably based in religion. There's a lot of alternate religions that keep Christianity at bay, but I also believe there's just a lot of atheism as well in Japan that leans in, that gives reason for that. Some of it's cultural. There's a sense that there's not a need for this in their lives. But yeah, it's just been a very hard place. And there are other people that are experts on Japan that we have serving there that could probably answer that better. But there are some churches, and we're trying to get those churches where they're healthy, to where they're, trying to reach their own people, to see more leaders developed. So I think it's coming, but it's been a very difficult field. You look at areas like number 7, what we would call the Great Sea Initiative. The Great Sea Initiative encompasses 21 countries that surround the Mediterranean. And most of those countries, especially on the North Africa side, are highly Muslim. Think places like Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, all of those are highly Muslim countries. And then you see a lot of Muslim influence in Southern Europe there. But it's, secularly, it's a very difficult place because there's this absence of a need for God. You've got the other religious influences that are there. And just historically, it's been a very difficult place for Christianity, just over the centuries. Like it's been a hotbed, right? Even from the age of the Crusades, you've got very difficult dynamics at play there. But we believe that that's a place where the gospel can grow. But it's one of those very, very, very difficult places. In Africa, go ahead.
Let's go back to Japan. And,
okay.
Because one of my friends point out the difference between if you go to Japan, that churches are not so blatantly obvious because they're like and there is like more like a business relationship with these churches, and most churches are like in somewhere in a hotel or something because cultural approach or whatever. Can you talk about a little about that?
A few of what I may understand, and I wouldn't expect to be quoted on this, but it's a very expensive place to be, obviously. And so it probably is difficult for churches maybe to have own facilities. And so they're probably renting various places. Also, I think it's so busy. I think one of the things you hear about Japan is the busyness that is there. And it's a very high formal society as well. So there's different aspects that I think just have made it difficult to see, a gospel movement entrenched there. And so maybe we've got to adjust our strategy, right? Maybe we've got to get more workers in. Again, those would be questions for a guy named Brian Lusky, who is the Japan Initiative leader. I wish I knew a little bit more about that. And it's causing me to have to go back and do a little bit of research myself. But it is a difficult location. I mean, culturally, it's just extremely different for those of us Westerners. And the church is going to look different in every part of the world, and it should. The church should not look like it looks like in America, in Estonia, or in Togo, or in Indonesia. The church will look very different all across the planet because it needs to look like the people in that part of the world and how they live their lives and how they see, God can be worshiped in all of these cultures, and it wants to be worshiped in all of these cultures, and it's not going to look one way. And I think over the years, part of the mistakes maybe that missions has made in the decades past is not only do we try to export the gospel, but we try to export our version of the church. And I think that's a mistake. I think we need to.
Have you seen the Marcus Scorsese's movie Silence?
I have not.
Okay. So pretty much in the movie talked about the 16th century and how Catholic missionaries from Portugal want to plant a church in Japan. But as I understand, historically, because I think Indonesia or Malaysia, I don't know which one, had accepted Catholicism. But what Japan sees that then there was religion behind it was a political influence, and what happened with the land, what didn't like it, anyway, Japanese weren't very fond with what happened to the land, and so okay. And one thing to point out in the movie is that missionaries came, and then the main problem was that they didn't bother to learn the language, learn the culture, what the leaders understanding of philosophy, something like. There were huge disconnect and disrespect to the Japanese culture, and
I think all that feeds in. All that feeds in, and again, I think there's been a lot of well-meaning mistakes made, by the church and by missionaries, in decades past, and I'm sure even now, we're always learning about that. I mean, you see a lot of, coming out of the Crusades and even out of the Spanish conquest, it was more about conquest as opposed to conversion, right? Mm-hmm. That's not what the Bible talks about at all. It's not convert or die, and you still see that a lot in Islamic faith, but in Christianity, there's no place for that, and you saw that a lot in some areas. But I think, if I were to give a personal illustration, when I went to work, I went on a trip to Fiji as a missions trip in 2004. And the story I had heard about Fiji is that when the gospel came there, it came through some Methodist missionaries that had come in the 1800s. And at that time, Fiji was really known as cannibalistic. They worshipped in temples that would have cannibalistic sacrifices. And it was a pretty dangerous place. And there was a ruling island called Bao Island that was off the eastern coast of Fiji, where kind of the king was at. And there were many of these cannibalistic altars and temples on this very small island. And the Methodist missionaries went and were on an island nearby Bao, and they kept praying for this king, and they kept praying for Fiji. Long story short, the king actually converted to Christianity and eventually kind of brought, the idea that we should convert to Christianity and quit eating ourselves, right, to the island nation of Fiji. And what was fantastic is they destroyed all those temples and idols that were on this island of Bao. They took the stones from those temples and built the church that's now on the island of Bao today. Mm-hmm. It was fascinating to see, wow, that's a conversion story. We're not only going to convert, we're going to quit eating ourselves, we're going to destroy these temples, and now we're going to honor God by building this church with what used to be dedicated to evil, now dedicated to Christ, right? Pretty amazing conversion. However, one of the other things that the missionaries brought was what the church should look like. If you look at this church on Bow Island, you could probably take it and put it in a Western American neighborhood, and it probably wouldn't look too different because it's got a steeple, it's got the, you know, four walls and window. Like, it looks very Western in that sense, even though it's made out of these stones. But like it doesn't look like a hut. Like, there's all these huts on the island. It looks very much like a church building that you might see in America. And also the pastors in Fiji, when I was there, would all wear a suit and a tie. Suits and ties did not originate in Fiji. They did not. It's a very Western concept about what a pastor should look like in the pulpit. But it was crazy. Even in the 2000s, you would see these pastors across Fiji, and they're wearing a suit and tie, but they weren't wearing like suit pants. They would wear a sulu, and a sulu is a native dress. It's a skirt. It's basically a long skirt that men wear, but it's called a sulu. And so they would wear their suit and tie with a sulu. I have a great picture of me in a suit and tie and a sulu preaching in Fiji, because that's what they thought a pastor had to look like. Again, there's nothing wrong with a suit and tie. There's nothing wrong with a sulu. But the idea is that it became entrenched. Not only did they bring the gospel, which was good, but they also brought their idea of what the church should look like. And I think we've got to be very careful about exporting what we think the church should look like from our cultural context and putting that on someone who decades later still thinks that's the way a believer or a pastor should look. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And so you've seen that. And I think we've done that in positive ways. We've done that in negative ways. There could be some of that, like you're saying, in Japan. I mean, America fought a war with Japan, right? Do you think they were really interested in what we had to say about the gospel in the years following World War II? Probably not. And there was a lot of racism towards Japanese from the American context, and even towards Japanese Americans, right? There were things like that were there. So the enemy likes to use all these dynamics to corrupt the message of the gospel, to put barriers to the message of the gospel. And we're fighting the battles today of those barriers that were put there decades, centuries ago, through different cultural aspects. So different parts of the world just have different reasons as to why they would be least reached. But it's an interesting conversation. It's actually something that's very interesting to look at. When any missionary is going to work in these parts of the world, you've got to identify, what is it about this place that makes this difficult? Or why hasn't the gospel? What is the history? Because we could easily go back and repeat the history that got us to this place, in a negative way, by not understanding those things. It's an interesting conversation for sure.
I think I know that I listen to the atheist and religious debate, and does God exist or not? And then I think the main problem is that, like you point out, is that they're no interest to other person. Like I'm an atheist and I say, don't believe in God, and so if you believe in God and you're stupid or something, and instead of coming to you, you believe in God, interesting, tell me more. And it's if everyone a little bit interested with other person, then we have a little less conflict, because if I sense that someone interested in me, so genuine interest towards me and what I do and what I believe and want to know, and then hard to feel bad about or hate this person, because you're interested, you want to know. And
yeah,
maybe
once you pull this screen down, we'll go back to our full video.
Okay.
But one of the ways I try to communicate what you're saying there, and I think it's true for you, Maddie. I think if you go back and look at your story and how you came to faith in Christ, I think you'll see some of this. But it's that idea that it begins with relationships. Maddie, why would you care what I have to say about anything if you don't know who I am, right? At some level, even if you listen to a TED Talk, right? If you're going to go on YouTube and watch a TED Talk or something, you want to know, why is what this guy's saying important? Does he have any credibility? Has he worked in that industry? Does he have experience in that? Okay, he has all those things. It makes me want to listen to what he has to say, right? Because we understand that credibility. And in relationships, that's where that genesis is at. It's I want to know who you are. Let's spend life together. I want to, tell me about your family. Why do you love doing what you're doing? What you're doing? What are you studying in school? Right? It's about this friendship. It's about this relationship. And then it's like, okay, I kind of like that guy. We could hang out together. I'd like to have coffee, or let's go play some soccer together, football. And you start to build a relationship. Or maybe it's through serving someone, right? I've got a skill set and I want to help you learn that skill set. Or I know English and you want to learn English, right? And so we have these ways that we build a relationship. Once a relationship is built, now you have something called trust. Okay, I like that guy. He told me he was going to be there and he showed up. He told me he was like this and I found out he was really like that, right? And so you start to say, I could trust that guy. I could trust that girl. Wow, if they say this, maybe there's something to it. So, but it starts with the relationships. You don't get the trust without building the relationship first. Mm-hmm. Once the trust is established, then we move into opportunities. Because of a relationship, we've built trust, and now we are given opportunities. So, Maddie, there were some people that you built relationship with, and then you learned to trust them and enjoy them a little bit. And then when they started to share the gospel with you, you leaned into that opportunity because there was trust and relationship. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I think so many times, because we're so excited about sharing the gospel with people, we'll skip the relationship, we'll skip the trust, and we'll just try to get to the opportunity to tell them about Jesus. And I appreciate that. Like, I understand, like, it is about sharing Jesus with people, and we want to do that with urgency. But we are going to be heard more when we start developing a relationship and building trust, and then move to that opportunity to share about who Jesus is. We don't have the relationship, don't have the trust, we don't get the opportunities.
When it comes to trusted, I remember a story in Japan that one of the Orthodox priests or missionaries went to the Japan, and there was he met one guy who was pretty much hates Christians. He was Japanese and he hates Christians, but because first of all, before he arrived in Japan, he was another missionary who said, okay, learn the culture, learn the language, learn the religion, and be patient, because it will be very, very lonely life. But anyway, he went there. This guy, and this a guy who hates Christians. Okay, and he started talking at maybe because he charismatic or something. But in the end, this guy who was hating Christians, he became an Orthodox priest and started reading gospel, and this kind of shows that if you pay interest, genuine curiosity towards other person, and it kind of changes the eyes, and your enemy become your best friend. And
right. Yeah, and I like you were mentioning a minute ago, from the context of people who are atheists, right? And even in Estonia, you see this. It's very Christianity is really looked at as something odd, right? It's not normal. And there's even, I think, a little bit of fear. In the US, people aren't necessarily afraid of the church, or, think that walking into a church building is all that odd. There's lots of community events that are held at churches and things like that. In Estonia, if I understand correctly, we don't really host outside events at the church because people aren't going to come because it's at a church. And so there's this real, keep Christianity and people like that at arm's length, because it's odd to us. It doesn't make sense. And because there is just this intellectual, they've convinced themselves intellectually that there is no God, right? People that come from a spiritual context, whether it might be Islam or Hinduism or other religions of the world, because they already have an understanding of the supernatural, sometimes it's easier to have a conversation with them about the gospel because they already believe that there is a higher being, right? There is something spiritual in their lives. Coming from a atheistic context, you're having to cross that bridge of helping them understand that there might be, a God out there in this universe that loves them. Okay, that's a far stretch, right? Intellectually to get to. But I think where it happens most effectively, Maddie, is in relationship, right? You build this relationship, you invest in their lives, you show them that you love them for who they are. You show them that they have value to you as a person. Even if they're not super interested in what you have to say about Christ yet, you're their friend, you're their, you know, partner in life, and just, you know, helper, someone that is cool to hang out with. And eventually they're going to see something in your life that's going to cause them to ask a question. And it's so much easier to share your faith with someone when they're asking you about it. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So instead of me going, hey, person I barely know, can I tell you about my faith? Right? It's much easier when someone says, Jimmy, there's something different about you. What is that? Oh man, I'm so glad you asked. Here's my story. Right? Isn't that a much better platform to start sharing the gospel? But you don't get there without spending the time in relationship and building that trust. And that takes time. It takes investment.
I think, like I said, okay, it's more like if I come to you and say, you want to learn more about my religion? I think it's more like a salesman approach. Okay, hey, really have this cool product. Do you want to buy it?
Right.
I don't know. I want, and they will leave, and because because of
The
what
coffee,
I see. Okay,
the
continue.
coffee I'm drinking right now is a brand called Black Rifle Coffee. Okay, Black Rifle Coffee. You know why I'm drinking Black Rifle Coffee? Because I have a friend at church that I found out a couple weeks ago now works for Black Rifle Coffee. And I love that guy. And I'm like, cool, man, I'm going to go check out your coffee. He didn't ask me to, right? I said, where do they sell this stuff? He told me, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get some Black Rifle Coffee. If I didn't know Chris, and I didn't know Chris was working for Black Rifle Coffee, and I saw Black Rifle Coffee in the store, I would walk right on by. Because this stuff's a little more expensive than the coffee I was normally buying, right? And so even in product world, in business world, you see this. And you know, what's the big thing on Instagram now, right? Influencers, right? This person that you admire or trust or whatever is now selling a product. So you're going to I want to buy their product, right? You get on and do that. It's the same thing. And so when we build relationship with people, it creates this opportunity to have different conversations. And hopefully that will eventually move to a conversation about Christ because we've lived it out in front of them. We've showed them Christ through our actions. And it can't only just be showing through our actions. At some point, we've got to open our mouths and share about who Jesus is. But I'm telling you, when we develop it from a relational standpoint, we get there much, I wouldn't say quicker necessarily, we get there in a better platform to have that opportunity for them to hear. You might be saying it, but if that trust isn't there, they're not going to be able to hear it yet in a way that's going to, penetrate into their heart. So I think in Converge, when we talk about trying to create these indigenous gospel movements, we're really trying to do that. We're trying to cultivate these relationships in these countries, develop these leaders so that they are doing this in a similar way through the relationships we create with people. Building time in relationships is never a waste. I think sometimes we can feel like, oh, I met with somebody and I didn't tell them about Jesus today. I understand that heart, and we want to get to that point, but I think the more time we spend in that relationship getting to know them is going to eventually get us to that opportunity where it's going to be received in a much better way. Like you've seen it before, Matt. You've seen the guy on the street corner probably holding up a sign, right? Jesus saves, John 3:16. Like I can appreciate that person's passion, but people are driving by. No one is listening to you. Why? Because you're not investing in anybody, right? You're not trying to be in people's lives. You're holding a sign on the corner, and that's just not a way that I think is going to radically change people's lives, is because you're holding a sign while they're trying to get from point A to point B in their hurried, busy life. I'm not going to say it's completely irrelevant, but I think there's a better way.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus did that, right? Jesus spent time with people, all throughout the Gospels. Jesus spent time with sinners, right? He spent time with the least of the least, right? He spent time with the poor. He spent time with people that were on a level with the religious leaders that you wouldn't want to be on, right? Those are the people he gravitated to and spent time with them, spent time with his disciples, right? Really invested in their lives and built this relationship with people, right? And through that was trust and opportunity. All right, Maddie, what do you think? Anything else you got a question about before I run today?
I think we got most of it. But
cool.
No, I don't have nothing.
That's fine. This has been fun to talk about. I mean, I could talk all day about mission stuff and Converge, and this is kind of the world I love to chat about. And obviously, like if you're watching this YouTube video someday, I'm just sharing my perspective. You know, people are gonna have different perspectives about maybe Japan or, you know, some of the other things we've talked about. I get that. I don't purport to be an expert on all these areas. I've got my field of view and can speak from that, but I'm sure there's others that can speak to different angles on this and probably even elaborate on that. So just, you know,
I think
to say that there's other perspectives out there.
I think the main message for whoever listened to this is that listen to an entire podcast, because then you like give and then put a comment what you think about this video. And because I think I've seen on YouTube and other places that there's something like I receive a comment and then I suspicion that you never watch the video, you listen to podcast.
Okay. That never happens, Maddie. No, it happens all the time. But seriously, like in the comments, if you've got something that would feed into this conversation, maybe a perspective that you have on some of the things that we've talked about, we'd love to hear that. Or you know, something that maybe was new and like, wow, that was interesting, I could use that. You know, those are always encouraging things for us to hear too. And you know, obviously if you're looking at this and you're investigating this, who is this Jesus guy, man, find our contact information on here, reach out to us. We'd love to share more with you about that if you've got questions in your own life.
Okay. Jimmy, and thank you for coming, and have a nice day.
It's cool what you're doing, and God bless you, man. Have a good one.
You too.